Thanks for coming. What I'm going to do, since there are still people at the back of the room who are picking up the handouts and getting themselves settled, I'm just going to do a little sort of pre-introduction to tell you what you just picked up at the back of the room. One of the items is a table. What this shows is a series of topics about financial aid and the exact URLs that you can visit on our website, studentaid.gov, to find details about those topics. So if you want this as a cheat sheet in your office, if you have a student or a parent asking you, how do I know if I'm dependent, or what about public service loan forgiveness? I know a lot of you guys want that information. This tells you exactly where to go on the website to find that. And yes, you may make copies. Then the other green, black, and white paper tells you how you can order our materials. They are free. You can get our stuff in bulk from our warehouse, and this explains that what you would do is you would make sure that you have an ID number. It's called an ML number. ML just stands for mailing list. It means your school is on our mailing list, and you plug in your ML number on a specific site, and then you can browse through our publications, decide what you want, and then order them in bulk. We do have a smaller print budget than we used to, but we do still print a number of publications, including the college preparation checklist. This blue college preparation checklist is brand new. I know that a lot of you guys are familiar with the green one that had the circle of people on the front cover. That one is now out of date because it talks about the FAFSA starting on January 1st. This new one was literally sent from the printer to me here in Columbus so that I could hand these out. I believe they've arrived in our warehouse by now, but if not, it's going to be any second now. And the website is open for orders, so if you want to get copies of this, definitely feel free. Again, the green and white sheet tells you how to do that. Okay, I think we're fairly settled. Great. Right, so 1718 FAFSA, a little bit different. Let's talk about that. We're going to talk about what exactly is changing for 1718, the reasons for the changes, why did we do this in the first place, some of the FAQs, some of the questions we've been hearing already from people since we announced the change about a year ago. And I'll show you a messaging and outreach calendar that has ideas of what types of messages you want to share with students and parents at what times of year. Obviously, it's totally up to you how you adapt that for your own use, but it's just some ideas. And I'll talk about materials and resources for outreach that you can use. So the minor changes. These are just some changes to the questions on the FAFSA. Nothing really big here, which is why I'm calling them minor. Medicaid has been added to the list of means-tested benefits. The means-tested benefits are used to determine whether a student can, for instance, exclude assets from what they report on the FAFSA, and in some cases for particularly low-income students, it also will help determine whether they are eligible for an automatic zero EFC. EFC is the expected family contribution. Do we have any FAFSA newbies here? You really don't know much about the FAFSA. You don't know what the EFC is. You've never heard of the IRS data retrieval tool. Okay, I'm going to briefly explain some things as I go through, but mostly this session is intended for people who are already familiar with the FAFSA and understand the process, and we'll be able to just sort of cruise along. If you need more details about what is this thing called the FAFSA and how do I help my students with it, just come by my booth. I'm in 316. Come by, say hello, chat. And also later in the presentation, I'll give you some information about where you can go online to educate yourself. So means-tested benefits, there's a question on the FAFSA that asks, has anybody in your household received any of these benefits over the last couple of years? And Medicaid has now been added to that list. There's also enhanced guidance for foster youth. And essentially what that is they've added a link to the student's state child welfare agency. And that way the student can click on that and find out, basically, if they're not sure that they were in foster care, they can get more information from that agency. And we've also tweaked the homelessness definition a little, not to change the definition, but just to add some clarification, saying, for instance, if you're living in a park, it gives a couple of examples like that, just to clarify what homelessness means. Also, one that might affect some of you if you work with particularly low-income students or if you're in a really rural area that doesn't have great internet access, the pre-printed FAFSA booklet is going away. It's not going to be printed anymore for 17-18. However, we are not leaving people out in the cold. If you work with students who absolutely need to fill out a FAFSA on paper, you've got a couple of options. One is that you can print out the PDF for them and they can fill out the PDF and then send it in. Another option, now bulk quantities of FAFSAs are not available to schools anymore, but your students can call 1-877-4-EDPUBS. That's our EdPubs warehouse. They can order a copy for themselves, or if they want another, couple of copies so that they can, make mistakes on the first one, and then make the second one their final one. The EdPubs warehouse will be storing a few pre-printed copies of the FAFSA PDF, essentially. So if for some reason you're not able to provide a printed out PDF for your students, they can call up and they can order it from themselves. So they should be all right. As long as they have access to a toll-free number, they're good. Okay, the big changes. Change number one, the FAFSA is launching earlier. Surprise, I'm sure nobody knew about that, right? The FAFSA, instead of launching on January 1, 2017, which it would normally do, is going to launch on October 1, 2016. And this change is going to be permanent. The FAFSA will launch October 1st every year for the next school year. So your people who are they just started their senior year in high school, they're thinking about going to college next year, they can fill out their FAFSA starting in just over a week. And yes, we are ready. You wouldn't believe how many people ask that. Is it really going to launch October 1st? Yeah. So this is a permanent change. It's going to happen every year. And also the other thing that I'm sure that you guys are aware of by now is that the FAFSA is going to ask for older tax information. So the 16-17 FAFSA that's been out since January 1st of this year asks for 2015 tax information, right? Just like all the FAFSAs before. 15-16 FAFSA asked for 2014 tax information. But what's happening now is we're going back another year to ask for earlier tax information. And the 17-18 FAFSA is going to ask for 2015 tax information, tax and income. The cool thing about that is that because it's asking for older tax information, there are going to be a lot of people who will be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool immediately as soon as the FAFSA launches because they did their 15 taxes already. Way back, they were due April 15th. And I know some of them, maybe they got an extension on their taxes, but October 15th is coming up really soon. So everybody's in pretty good shape unless they're in a really bizarre circumstance. The IRS data retrieval tool, for anybody who hasn't heard of it, is a tool that you can access while you're in the middle of doing the FAFSA online. And you sign in and it helps you grab your information automatically from the IRS website and it just plops it into your FAFSA for you. And boom, you're all set. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to find your tax forms. It's just all in there for you. This table just shows in sort of a graphic form what the changes are. It compares the launch dates for several FAFSA years. For 15-16, the launch date was January 1st of 2015. So you could submit that FAFSA from January 1st of 2015 through June 30th of this year. 16-17, again, January 1 through June 30th. And then it's showing 17-18 in bold, just to show, hey, this is where the change happens, launching October 1st. So these students have a really long time to submit their FAFSA, but of course they're going to want to do it as early as possible, and we'll talk about why in a minute. This also shows which income and tax information they'll be using. So for 15-16, it was 2014. For 16-17, it was 2015. And again, in 17-18, it's 2015. So why did we do this? Actually, a lot of reasons, one of which was there were a lot of organizations, including NACAC, that supported going to, asking for older tax and income information. And what we found was that research and our own data at the Department of Education supported making the change. Some of the benefits, there are a lot of college admission application deadlines that occur in the fall. So we wanted to make financial aid more tied in with that, make it happen more at the same time, which can be a little fraught, I understand. People are going to be pretty busy. But at least if they do their FAFSA relatively early on, maybe in October, and then they've got college admission applications in November and into December, then at least they've got their expected family contribution nice and early, and they can just use that as they go forward to compare schools, even if the school doesn't get back to them right away with an aid offer, or even with an estimated aid offer. They can at least have their expected family contribution and compare schools that way. They don't need to estimate tax information anymore. There was kind of this two-step dance that people used to have to do if they wanted to get their FAFSA in nice and early and meet all those state and school deadlines. They would fill out their FAFSA, but it was January, so of course they hadn't done their taxes yet. So they'd put estimated information on their FAFSA and submit it to make sure they met all those FAFSA deadlines. And then they'd come back later after they did their taxes and they'd update the information. You don't have to do that anymore because everybody's already done their taxes. So that's kind of nice. As I mentioned, the IRS data retrieval tool is going to be available immediately. And because I am a government worker, I will use initials from now on and call it IRS DRT because that takes less time. Also, you get the earlier receipt of your EFC. There we go, more initials. And there's less pressure on the student in a way. I understand that there's more pressure if they're trying to do their FAFSA and their college admission applications at the same time, which is why I personally recommend they do their FAFSA as early as possible so they just get it out of the way and then really focus on the admission applications. But there's less pressure in the sense that there is more time for them to assess different schools, to compare the schools, to look at what their options are. And they have more time to get the FAFSA in before most state and school deadlines. And most is an important word because there are some states that have moved their deadlines quite early. And I'll let you know which ones those are in just a second. Okay, so we're going to talk now about some of the FAQs that we've gotten, and they are frequent. These are some questions that we've received at Federal Student Aid some of them are from financial aid administrators over the past year. A lot of them are from people who are in college access programs or in high schools. So people, a lot like you guys, have been asking these questions. So what I wanted to do was answer them during the session in hopes that this will answer maybe some of the things that were in your head. And then once we get to the end of the presentation, then we've got mics in the center aisles. And if people have questions at that time, then I'll ask that you come to the mic and ask your question. So, will deadlines be earlier? Yes, no, maybe, depends. Most state and school deadlines we're finding from the states and the schools that we've spoken to, most of them aren't changing, so that it does give students more time to get their FAFSA in, which is great. However, there are several states that in past years have had a deadline of, quote unquote, as soon as possible after January 1st. So in other words, as soon as possible after the FAFSA launches. they are moving their deadline back to as soon as possible after October 1st. And it varies from state to state. There are some states that have multiple deadlines for the FAFSA. Like for one state program, it'll be as soon as possible after October 1st. For another state program, it'll be November 30th. You know, it just differs. So the important thing to do is to make sure that your students know the deadlines for their state, like the earliest possible deadline for their state out of all those state programs, and the deadlines for all the schools that they plan to apply to, so that they make sure they meet the earliest of all of those deadlines. The school deadlines are going to be on the school websites, and the state deadlines are on the FAFSA for the most part. Some of them will say, you know, see such and such, and they send you somewhere else, but for the states that have given us deadlines, they're on the FAFSA and on the FAFSA site. The states that have their as soon as possible after October 1st deadline, last I heard, okay, and you can double check on the FAFSA. The PDF FAFSA, a non-fillable version of the PDF FAFSA, is going up on our websites today. As a matter of fact, my colleagues are working on it as I'm standing here talking to you. So you will be able to take a look at that. And then the fillable PDF FAFSA will be available October 1st. So those states with as soon as possible after October 1st deadlines for at least one state program are Alaska, Illinois, Kentucky, North Carolina, North Dakota, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Texas, Vermont, and Washington. And no, that is not 100% solid, so please check. Okay, so I did a FAFSA in 16-17. Is that information going to be carried over into 17-18? Some of it, yes, just like any normal renewal FAFSA. But the tax information, so even though we're still asking for 2015 tax information in 17-18, as we did in 16-17, we're not pulling that information in. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, honestly, is this is only a one-time thing that we're asking for the same year 2 years in a row. And the amount of work it would take to make the system change to be able to grab that information was not worth the time and the money. Remember, that's taxpayer money. The other reason is that too many things could have changed since last year. You know, for one thing, we're going to talk about marital status in a second. So we didn't want to just dump that information into the 17-18 FAFSA and have people not really pay attention and make sure they did everything right. So people will be able to do a renewal FAFSA for 17-18, but they'll see just the typical things that get pre-populated. You know, your name, I think it's like your name, address, some pretty basic information. But just remember, you know, okay, oh my goodness, that sounds like such a pain, but the IRS data retrieval tool is going to be available right away, October 1st. So that'll help save some hassle. Can a student choose to report 2016 information? No. The student has to answer the questions that are on the FAFSA as they're asked on the FAFSA. They can't just decide what information to put on there. They don't have a choice of which year to report, even if their family's financial circumstances changed since 2015. They need to fill in the 2015 information. And then if they've had a circumstance in their family where, you know, mom just lost her job last week, fill out the FAFSA as it asks you to, submit the FAFSA, and then contact the school that the student intends to attend and tell them what the situation is. And if they're applying to more than one school, they have to contact each school. This is actually the way it's always been with the FAFSA. If your family had a sudden drop in income since last year or now since 2 tax years ago, you need to fill out the FAFSA as it asks you to and then talk to the school. So there's nothing new about that. I think it's just like people get a little concerned because 2015 feels like a long time ago. It is important to remember that for certain items on the FAFSA, it asks as of today. So for instance, what is your balance of savings and checking accounts as of today? So that's an easy question. It's, today meaning the day you are filling out the FAFSA. They just look that up. You don't have to go back to 2015 for something like that. All right, so let's talk about the marital status. This is where it gets kind of interesting. And this is the way it's been. It just, because it's been a little while since that tax year, it's likely to affect more people than it used to. Let's say we're talking about the student's parents, okay? If the student's parents that they're reporting the information about on the FAFSA were not married in 2015, so mom filed her tax form and dad was over there somewhere else, not married to mom, filing his tax form. If they weren't married in 2015, but they're married now, you're gonna need to add those two together to report on the FAFSA. Obviously, you can't use IRS DRT for this. The IRS DRT does not work for people who filed separate returns. If they were married in 2015, but now they're not married, the student will subtract the income, or more likely the parent will subtract the income for the spouse that's no longer in the picture. And if they were married in 15, then got divorced, and now the parent is remarried to somebody else, again, you need to take the ex's income out, add the new person in, and we all get to do a lot of math, which just makes life so much fun when we're stressing about applying to college. But it needs to be done correctly. So if there's a little bit of math involved, they can just buckle down and they can handle it. This is a screenshot that I'm sure is unreadable to you. It just basically shows that there's a warning when you get to a certain page. If you indicate that you recently married or remarried, because the FAFSA does ask what is the date of your marital status, it'll say, attention, you must provide financial information from your 2015 tax return on the following pages. You indicated that you recently married or remarried. To correctly answer the student financial questions, you must report information about you and your current spouse, even if you filed separate tax returns for 2015. This is if the student, this is like an independent student who's saying they recently got married. So there are tips on the FAFSA as people go through. It'll sort of say, hey, make sure you're doing this right, and it'll tell them what to do. Okay, this is an interesting one. This is something that we've seen going around on social media lately, like over the last couple of months, and we don't know where it came from. Should a student update to include 2016 tax info once taxes are filed? I've heard variations of this question, like, okay, so if somebody fills out the FAFSA in the fall, then they'd use the 2015 tax information. But in the spring, starting in January, they're going to use 2016 tax information. The answer is no. And please make sure that your students and parents understand that. The 1718 FAFSA does now, in its pre-October 1 form, and will, for all eternity, ask for 2015 tax and income information. You don't go in and put in 15 now and then update once you've done your 2016 taxes. All that estimate and update, all that stuff is done. We've made it easier. You fill it out one time, you use IRS DRT, you're done, you go about your merry way, and you get your aid offers. Will students receive aid offers earlier if they apply earlier? Maybe some of them, maybe a lot of them. We don't know yet. We've talked to some schools, and some of them are saying, yeah, we're hoping to make some offers earlier. Others are not going to. One way to compare the cost of schools if a student wants to be kind of looking at things nice and early is to go to collegescorecard.ed.gov and look at cost comparisons based on averages of the schools. And also remember that even if a student does get an early aid offer, it's probably going to be an estimate. At the moment, the Pell tables, the things that show like what's your EFC and full-time versus three-quarter time, et cetera, what's your cost of attendance, all those things, and it shows what that student's Pell Grant Award would be for that year. The Pell tables usually don't come out until February. So, if they don't come out until February again this time, then any aid offers before that include Pell are going to be an estimate. However, just to give us all hope, there are people at the Department of Education who are working to see if it may be possible to get the schedule out, the Pell schedule out before the end of this year. So that could help some people. Okay, so if a student was selected for verification in 16-17, is he going to be selected in 17-18 too? Because both are using 2015 tax information. Well, there's actually no rule that says that just because they were selected in 16-17, they're going to automatically be selected in 17-18. Remember, there's a lot of things that come into verification. There are some schools that verify all students. So it could be that, yes, they're going to be selected again in 17-18 because they're going to be selected every year at that school. Or it could be yes, because they were randomly selected again. There are a variety of options. And also, just to let you know, the criteria for selection for verification, the non-random ones, which I do not know, change a little bit from year to year. So there's really no way to tell with this one, but no, not as a rule. Okay, so let's talk about outreach for the 17-18 FAFSA. One of the things that we started hearing really early on when we started talking to NACAC and NCAN and the American School Counselor Association and some others about the 17-18 change, we started hearing from them, our members want a recommended timeline of activities. So can you provide something like that? Back in April, we put up an early version of this messaging and outreach calendar, and we tweak it every once in a while. I think it's in fairly final form at this point, but we also tweak some other things on our website that I hope to show you in a minute if I can handle the technology. This will be a nice little challenge for me. So let's talk about some activities that you can do to help your students prepare for the 17-18 cycle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the calendar and we'll talk about what we recommend for month by month. Now obviously May, June is gone, but this is something you can put in place next year with your juniors. In May and early June, we recommend that if you haven't already started, you definitely start at that point preparing for the fall. One thing you want to do is make sure you tell those rising seniors to get their FSA IDs. Who's never heard of FSA ID? You have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, the FSA ID replaces the old federal student aid PIN that people used to use to sign their FAFSA. The FSA ID is a username and password. The student creates it, the parent creates their own, they use it to sign the FAFSA, they use it to go back into their FAFSA, the student uses it to go back into their FAFSA later if they want to see what's going on with it. There are also some other websites that federal student aid provides that the student will use the FSA ID to get into. It's a username and password, and it's really important. I just want to put in a little plug right now. It's important to remind students and parents that they need to create their own FSA IDs. The vast majority of problems that we've seen with people using the FSA ID are because somebody else created the FSA ID for that student and they have no idea what it is. And they don't know what the challenge questions are, so they can't retrieve it. Or they tried to do it sharing an email address with somebody else. It needs to be one person, one FSA ID, and that one person needs to create their own. And they need to keep it secret because it's a signature. It can be used for identity theft, essentially. So that's my little public service announcement. All right, so let's go through month by month here. May and early June, tell them to get their FSA IDs. They can get it early, they can get it any time they want. Student, parent, be prepared. Early to mid-September, hold a financial aid night. I have already heard several people who've come by my booth telling me that they've held a financial aid night, like last week or, so yay. Apparently this was good advice because this is what people sort of are instinctively doing at their schools. I believe we have a question, and if you do have a question, you have to go to the microphone. So if you have a question in the middle of while I'm talking, feel free to go to the mic. I will see you. I will detect movement. And I'm going to hold for a second so our colleague can ask a question about the calendar. Oh, sound guy, please.
Hello. Oh, there we are. My financial aid meeting is on Tuesday night, and I'm wondering if students and parents still have to file for their own FSAID separately.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. So, do students and parents have to get their own FSAIDs separately? Yes. You and your parent don't share the same signature, right? So, yeah, you each have to get your own. It identifies you uniquely. It identifies you by way of your name, your date of birth, your social security number, and that is something that's unique to you. And the student and the parent separately are going to sign that FAFSA just as they always have. So, yep, one FSAID per person, student needs it, and one of the parents whose information is going to be provided on that FAFSA is going to need one as well. We have one more question, and then we'll continue with the calendar.
Quick follow-up is, are the challenge questions the same? Like, are they set up the same way and the same number and all that stuff this year? This was a challenge for a lot of my families.
My understanding is that the challenge questions are basically set up the same as they were, maybe last year. However, the FSAID team is constantly taking into consideration all the feedback, the much feedback that we get about the FSAID. There are certain challenge questions that I think are not going to go away, even if they are kind of a pain, because they have to do with security. Okay, one more question.
And this is more of a recommendation, something that we learned the hard way last year, is that your students and parents use an email address that they will have with them for the foreseeable future. A lot of times school emails will deactivate when they graduate, so that can create a problem. So something to think about.
Thank you, that's an awesome recommendation. That's really good. Each person who's creating an FSAID needs their own email address. You can't have two people using the same email address to create their separate FSAIDs. So that's a really good recommendation. Make sure it's an email address that you're going to have for a while and not lose when you finish high school. Okay, so early to mid-September, hold your financial aid night. And the piece of paper that I provided at the beginning that's on the back table, just in case you haven't picked it up, will tell you how to order materials for your financial aid night. We have a variety of things that you can hand out. We also have things that are on our website that you can either print out and hand out, or you can show one of our videos, et cetera. And I'll talk about some of those resources in a little while. Again, remind the students and parents to make sure they know what their FSAID is, because the FAFSA is coming up soon, and it would be great if they had it ahead of time. It saves hassle when you're doing the FAFSA. The importance of filling out the FAFSA promptly. Early submission equals a chance of more money. There are a lot of states and schools that have limited funds, so they're going to have those, those deadlines saying, do it as soon as you can, because we start awarding for these programs relatively early. And depending on when you put your FAFSA in, that's where you fall in the priority list for getting awarded that aid. October, if you can, host a FAFSA completion event. This is another way of getting people to fill out their FAFSA early. It's great to provide hands-on help in filling out the FAFSA, but definitely get people who've done it a million times, know it inside out, really know how to answer those questions, rather than people who are well-meaning but are going to be guessing at the answers and saying, well, it would seem reasonable that, not everything on the FAFSA is, going to seem reasonable. You need to really know the questions inside out in order to help people fill it out. In October, it's great also to explain the next steps. A big question that we get a lot at the Federal Student Aid Information Center is, okay, well, I did my FAFSA, where's my check? Why hasn't the government sent my check yet? People don't understand how the process works. So it's great at your FAFSA night if you also explain to them how the rest of the process works and what they should expect next. And if you're not sure yourself, one place you can find out is on studentaid.gov, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. In the FAFSA section of studentaid.gov, it does talk about next steps after you've done your FAFSA. Then November through April, just help students interpret and compare aid offers. Help them understand that, this thing right here, this is actually a student loan, and that means this is money that you'll have to repay. So maybe you want to think about how much money do you really need, and maybe you can accept less of that loan. Stuff like that. Also, if they get selected for verification or if they have additional paperwork they need to fill in and give to the college, remind them that there are deadlines associated with those activities and they should make sure that they meet those deadlines. And of course, I know that students these days ignore their email. Please encourage them to check it once in a while, including their junk mail. Okay, now let's talk about our websites that we have available to help you and to help your students and their parents. The Financial Aid Toolkit is a site that was designed specifically for you, the counselor, the mentor, the person who's advising the students and parents and teaching them about financial aid and the application process and the types of aid and how it all works. The toolkit is for you, not for your students and not for their parents. Please don't send them there. They'll be confused. They won't find the information they need. The main idea of the toolkit is that it combines, it grabs a lot of federal student aid resources and puts them all in one place. And it provides, in the far right side with the woman with the sort of blue/teal shirt, it provides a search tool where you can filter, you can go through drop-down boxes and find our resources based on, I want a video about the FAFSA for high school seniors, and boom, it shows you all videos that are tagged with, FAFSA and high school seniors. And this is our materials. There are a couple of things that aren't ours, but they're from other government agencies. So everything that you're going to get on here comes from the government. Some of the pages I wanted to point out on the toolkit. financialaidtoolkit.ed.gov/FAFSA is a page that gives you some general, very high-level information about the FAFSA so that you can get just the basics, but also some tips and some talking points so that when you talk to students and parents, you'll have some ideas of some of the things to emphasize, maybe some of those things that students tend to get confused about. Also, there's a sub-page of that FAFSA page called FAFSA Updates. And that's one of the things that my colleagues are back in the office in DC updating right now. I had asked them to have it up by 10:30 so that my session attendees would see the information when they got back to their computers. What we have on the FAFSA Updates page is a table of FAFSA materials, and it shows either a link to the material if it's ready, so that PDF FAFSA that's being posted today. Later on today, I'll be asking our techie guy to put a link to that from that page. The FAFSA on the Web worksheet is being posted today, and the FAFSA demo somebody asked me about yesterday, I think that's going live this Sunday. And there's a variety of things listed on there, and anything that is up is going to have a link, and anything that isn't yet up has a date saying this will go live on whatever, September 25th, September 30th, or October 1st in the case of the FAFSA.gov site. financialaidtoolkit.ed.gov/resources is that search tool that I was talking about a minute ago. That's how you can get directly to that page and find all the PowerPoint presentations and videos and graphics and fact sheets and everything that we've got for you. Then our announcement about the 17-18 FAFSA is at /FAFSA-changes. That announcement has just the basic information about what's changing. The FAFSA's launching earlier, you can provide earlier tax information, and it also has links to some of those resources that we have available for 17-18, including a document that lists all the resources that we've been updating for 17-18, and when things will be available if they aren't right now. So we are still updating things as we speak, partly because we're a small team and we're busy, and partly some of them aren't going to go up until the very last minute because they would actually confuse students if we had them up on the site right now because they're not relevant yet, and we don't want to confuse people. So this is the resources page. This shows the drop-down box under topic pointing to our topic for 17-18 FAFSA. We have a topic for FAFSA, which gives all FAFSA information that we have, and we have a topic specifically for 17-18 FAFSA information, and there are a number of items that are there, and that number will grow. For instance, one of the things we're going to post next week is the am I dependent or independent fact sheet, and that's being updated to include the way the questions are worded on the 17-18 FAFSA. So that'll be added to that within a week, by the 30th, basically. So what this is showing is that somebody has selected 17-18 FAFSA, then they're going to click on that red button over to the right-hand side. It says Get Resources, and then they get, this only shows 3 because I couldn't do a screenshot of the whole page. You'd be able to see even less than you can right now. This shows some of the variety of things that we have. This is a PDF. It's that messaging and planning calendar that I was showing you guys earlier in the presentation. There's a fact sheet that's talking points that you can use, and that does include talking points for those of you who are working with students and parents who've done the FAFSA before, to help you reach out to them and explain what is it that's going to be different this year when you do your FAFSA. For a lot of high school seniors, it's like this is the first time. They don't know that October 1st is special. They don't know that 2 tax years ago is special. But this is for people who kind of were expecting certain things for the FAFSA, and you want to explain to them. Also, we have here, there was a FAFSA update webinar that we posted, so that's an archived, recorded webinar. Those are just some examples of what we have up there. All right, studentaid.gov. Before we move on to that, we're going to take a question.
Are your presentations, videos, and webinars available in Spanish?
The presentations are not, unless we've done them in Spanish, unless we ourselves presented them in Spanish. The videos, most of them, I just found out yesterday that one of them didn't have Spanish captioning. Most of them have Spanish captioning. The voiceover is relatively expensive, so we have English voiceover and Spanish captioning. And fact sheets, brochures, booklets are all translated into Spanish, as well as being available in English. Did my voice just get really, really quiet? Okay, all right. I sound quiet to me. I want to make sure the sound is okay. All right, we have another question over here.
Concept Schools from Chicago. A question about the FAFSA completion rate. So some of our schools receive those rates. Do you have any intention to involve more college counseling into the FAFSA completion rate? Because when we look at the numbers, I mean, we help them out, but at some point they miss their social security number, mistype, and some information doesn't go through. They don't really, the students don't know really what's going on. So do you have any intention to include college counselors into the FAFSA completion?
Can you talk a little more about what you mean by including college counselors in FAFSA completion rates?
So sometimes we receive like percentage, like 75% completed FAFSA,
Right.
but we don't really know the names, and our principal can ask like, that number is not really high, so what's going on? So we don't have that specific information. Maybe we have to talk to every single student, make sure that their FAFSA went through or not. But since we don't have that specific information, it's kind of hard to help them out.
Right, okay. Talk to me afterwards, because I can link you with somebody back in my office who you can give that feedback to, or you can give the feedback to me, and I'll get your card or something and keep in touch about that. I know that there have been calls for schools to be able to see the names of the students who have and haven't. I don't know what the current privacy issues are around that and where they are in resolving those. The FAFSA completion rates are something that come out of my office 8 floors above me, but they're not something that I have day-to-day experience with. Okay, if anybody has anything that you want to add to help your colleagues, can you step to the mic, because we are being recorded? Thank you.
Depending on what your state chooses to do, all state agencies now have permission from the Department of Ed to download student unit record level data. Most of the states that do it do it to the high schools or to the school districts. So you have to figure out if your state higher ed agency is doing it, and there's probably a data sharing agreement that has to be signed between your district and the state distributor of the information, but you can see student level data by name, submitted, completed, and even if they were selected for verification.
Thank you. Fabulous. Thanks. Yes?
I'm doing my FAFSA night this coming Thursday, and I'm anticipating parents of students who they've had older kids do FAFSAs years ago. What's their FSA ID process going to look like? If they forget that they had an old one, are they going to be prompted when they try to get a new one to say you already have one? Like, what should I be advising them?
Okay, so if the parent filled out a FAFSA with an older child years ago, like literally years, plural ago, then they won't have an FSA ID. What they'll have is a federal student aid PIN, probably. And we are still at a point where you can link your PIN to your FSA ID so that you don't have to go through the Social Security Administration match. So what'll happen is when they go in, they can select the option to link their PIN, and that will be a way for them to expedite the FSA ID process. If that doesn't work, they can, just create a brand new FSA ID. It's not a problem.
One other thing on the state agencies. So in North Carolina, there's a finish the FAFSA through CFNC, but you have to have your superintendent sign off on it, so there's a lot of red tape around it to make it FERPA compliant, but it can be done. And it is helpful because, like my former colleagues just said, you can see if the kid's been selected for verification or not, and whether or not they're eligible for state aid. I know a huge problem we ran into last year is students with double last names were not being considered for state aid because of how their FAFSA was processed. So I would highly encourage you to find the information to make sure your kids are being caught.
Thank you. That would mean I'd be in trouble because my last name is Forbes Cameron. Oh, man. All right, one more question?
For parents that have multiple students in college, do they have to do multiple FSID for that parent, or one is enough for all of them?
I heard the first part of that. Can you repeat the last part? For parents who have multiple kids in college?
Do they need multiple FSID numbers, or
do they need
one?
multiple FSA IDs? Each person has one FSA ID. So like if you're a parent and you're signing this kid's FAFSA and you're signing that kid's FAFSA, it's like if you're signing different documents on paper with a pen, you don't change your signature from one to another. So just think of it as a signature. It'll make sense. It'll fall into place. Thanks for that question, actually. Somebody asked me that yesterday at the booth, and I was thinking I need to remember to bring that up. All right, let's talk about studentaid.gov. You guys know about studentaid.gov? Yes? Okay, well, I see one person nodding and 0 hands, so I'm going to pretend that nobody here has ever heard of studentaid.gov before. But everybody knows FAFSA.gov, right? Okay, great. Studentaid.gov is our information site. FAFSA.gov is an application site. It has lots and lots and lots of help and hints information on there. But studentaid.gov is where you get the details and the advice and all kinds of the span of the whole life cycle of learning about college and thinking about your career and searching for schools and what types of aid are there anyway, and do I qualify, and how do I apply, and then, okay, if I got loans, how do I repay my loans? The whole thing is on there. Studentaid.gov is the site for students and parents. Obviously, you guys are welcome to use it as well to educate yourselves further than you would be able to on the financial aid toolkit. This is where you want to send students and their parents. And if you want to go specifically to the FAFSA section of the site, you can either click on the FAFSA link in the white on black menu at the top, or you can just type in studentaid.gov/FAFSA, and that'll take you straight to the main page of the FAFSA section of the site. Right here, this is showing, if you had sort of pointed at that part of the menu, it drops down and you can see all the sub-pages for that section of the site. That section has detailed information about the FAFSA, the FSA ID, the IRS data retrieval tool, student dependency status, reporting parent information, and what happens after the FAFSA is submitted. So all the basics that they need to understand. Then on studentaid.gov/resources, #, hashtag, whatever you want to call it, FAFSA. This is a section of our resources page that has FAFSA resources aimed at students and parents. So on the financial aid toolkit, it's all this stuff plus stuff for you guys, like those PowerPoint presentations. We don't put the PowerPoint presentations on studentaid.gov because students and parents are not going to look at them. But we put videos and we put fact sheets and we put graphics and PDFs of brochures and all kinds of stuff on this site for students so that they can find answers to their specific questions, such as, in this case, what's an FSA ID and why do I need one? And am I dependent or independent? And who counts as my parent when I'm filling out my FAFSA? All that stuff is on there in PDF form, and it's also on the site in just like regular HTML page form. And I just wanted to put in another plug for the table, one of the things that I was giving out at the back of the room. This one has direct URLs to the places on the site that talk about those very topics. If you look in the FAFSA section of this, you can find out, you know, okay, FSA ID, dependency status, which parent's information report on the FAFSA. All that stuff is on here with their direct URLs. So if you or your students have questions, you know where to find them. If you have been to the back of the room and all the documents are gone back there, please feel free to come by my booth. It's number 316, and I do still have more copies of these. I also have a bunch of copies of the college preparation checklist that I showed you before, brand new. So feel free to come and grab a handful of these. I've got plenty left. Yes, we have a question.
Yes, I have a question. Does this particular site have instructions for students whose parents are undocumented, don't have a social security number, though the student may be a U.S. citizen?
Does studentaid.gov have instructions for students whose parents are undocumented and don't have a social security number? I think it does, but off the top of my head, I can't say absolutely. If it doesn't, then it's on me to add that because I actually write the FAFSA section of this site, and that's definitely important information. I think that somewhere on there we do say if your parent doesn't have an SSN, just put in all zeros on the FAFSA for them, and it'll go through.
Okay, because I recall from last year working with students in our school district that there was a more paper process or procedure for them to, you know, once the student had completed the FAFSA, to actually get the parent to sign off. So it was a mail-in manual process versus an electronic process.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. So a student whose parent doesn't have a social security number, that parent won't be able to get an FSA ID because the FSA ID asks for your social security number. So what's going to happen with that, if you don't have an FSA ID, you can't sign the FAFSA electronically. So what happens is when you get to the end of the FAFSA, you can do your FAFSA electronically. You can fill it all out online. When you get to the end, it asks you, are you going to provide FSA IDs to sign? Or are you going to print and mail a signature page? What that family would have to do, because the parent doesn't have their FSA ID, they would print out their signature page, they would physically sign it, and then they'd mail it in, and then their FAFSA would be processed from there. So yeah, that's right.
And about how long do you expect that process to take versus the electronic?
Longer. Yeah, there's actually a chart. I don't think it's on studentaid.gov, but there's a chart in the Counselors and Mentors Handbook that says, depending on what type of FAFSA you filled out, like was it on paper, was it online, and did you provide an email address, and so on, how long it would take for you to, you know, get your student aid report back. I am going to try to remember. I'm thinking it's a couple of weeks. It's not like months or anything. There's definitely a delay. It's not like the 3 days that people would expect after doing their electronic signature, but it's not forever.
Thank you.
Sure. We're going to hang on for a second for one more question.
Hi. I work with a lot of domestic kids and I help them with their FAFSA, but I also tell international students that I work with, no, this is not for you because you're not an American citizen. But this year I have an unusual student. He has joint Iranian-American citizenship, believe it or not. His parents live in Iran and pay taxes there. Am I correct in telling him that since these taxes are not paid in the United States, that he is not eligible for any sort of FAFSA aid?
What would be correct when you tell him will be to tell him that if he is a citizen, he should say, yes, I'm a citizen when he's filling out the FAFSA. And parent citizenship status, as you know, does not matter. And if the parents don't have SSNs, they'd put in all zeros for their SSNs. They would put in their address on the FAFSA. If they live in a foreign country, where normally you would put in like the state abbreviation for their address, they would put FC for foreign country. And then what would happen with the tax information would be they would have to basically, they would say they're not going to file. If the FAFSA asks, have you filed taxes? Yes, I have, and then it asks you what type of tax form. No, I haven't, but I'm going to. And that actually still is relevant for a few people now. You know, the people who do their FAFSAs October 1st and they've got their extension on their taxes. There are still a few people who can say, I haven't filed my taxes yet, but I will file. And then the other option is, I'm not going to file because I don't have to file. In this case, it would be, I don't have to file in the US. So then what it does, if you say, I'm not going to file, it doesn't ask you about your tax information because you didn't file taxes. It asks you about your income information, and they would then translate their currency into US dollars. And the FAFSA does have information about how to do that.
Thanks.
Sure. Yep.
I have a question about the parents and marriage and separation. So if they're using 2015 income, but they're separated now when they file the FAFSA, they can no longer use the IRS data retrieval tool?
Correct.
Okay, so they just have to populate everything by hand and then...
Yep.
Separated, is that legally separated or just not living in the same home?
Okay. Later,
Yeah.
when I go onto the actual internet,
Okay.
wave your hand at me and
Okay.
remind me that you asked that question, okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I'll show you guys where that information is about how to figure out like who's a legal parent and which parent counts as on your FAFSA and so on. This information is online on studentaid.gov/FAFSA-parent. Okay, so let's talk through the rest of this. There's a little bit more to go, and then I'll show you a couple of websites, and I'll show you exactly where the dependency status info is and the parent info is, so that you can see that this stuff, all the sort of typical questions are covered. There are always some funky questions, you know, and that's where the Federal Student Aid Information Center comes into play, or that's where the FAFSA chat, you know, if you're doing the FAFSA and you get really confused, you can go and chat with a customer service rep. They can help you out with things that are just a little bit out of the ordinary that we don't already cover. Okay, just like on the toolkit, I told you guys there was an announcement that's aimed at you, telling you about the FAFSA changes and some basic information and linking to resources. There's a more simple version of that announcement on studentaid.gov and has been since September 14th of 2015. This is really aimed very much at students and parents who have been doing the FAFSA before and telling them what's new. So if you wanted to grab that chart that I used earlier in the presentation, it's on that page. It's also, if I remember correctly, it's on the toolkit in the resources section, so you can grab it and show people what the changes are visually. Federal Student Aid is on certain social media sites. We're on twitter.com/FAFSA. And one of the things that we do there is every month, usually the last Wednesday of the month, except sometimes around the holidays in December, we spend an hour answering people's questions on Twitter. We have people invited to submit questions about a day or so ahead of time if they want to, or they can submit questions during that hour and we'll answer the questions on Twitter. If we don't get to all of them, the team will finish answering them the next morning. On Facebook, we are at Federal Student Aid, and they do get questions and discussion on that site. In fact, that's one of the places where they've been seeing people saying, no, you're going to fill out the FAFSA using 2015 tax information, but then you're going to update in the spring. So we wanted to nip that in the bud. Don't let people start saying that. That's wrong. We are on YouTube. We have several playlists, including one for the FAFSA. And there are 3 videos that are just about finished with the updates for the new, mentioning the FAFSA launches October 1st, et cetera, et cetera. Those should be up on the site anytime now. I'm gonna guess next week, but it depends on a variety of things. Getting help with the FAFSA, as I mentioned, on FAFSA.gov, you can chat with a customer service representative. There are help and hints for every question. There's a general help thing if you click on help, and then that's how you can work through and get to the chat. There's a variety of ways to get information about the FAFSA while you're using the FAFSA. You also can call the Federal Student Aid Information Center at 1-800-4FED-AID, or you can email them. Okay, what I'm going to do before we get to the questions, and Mr. Soundman already has the mics open, so we're fine. I'm going to master this technology, and I'm going to switch from my PowerPoint over to our website. Ta-da! Okay, this is studentaid.gov, live and in person. If you wanted to find out, okay, so the parents are separated, who counts, how does that work, what if they're separated but not divorced, you can go to the FAFSA section. Under filling out the FAFSA, we have a bunch of really great subpages. We have information on the FSA ID. We have information on dependency status. We have information on reporting parent information, and we have information on listing colleges on the FAFSA. Remember a couple of years ago, everybody was up in arms because colleges were seeing the other colleges that the student listed? Not anymore. They don't see the other colleges. Okay, so reporting parent information, I'm just going to answer this question quickly, and then if other people have questions, feel free to get up and wait by a microphone. If you have some place that you really need to get to, that's cool. I won't be offended. Just please be really quiet when you leave so that people can hear the Q&A. Thanks. All right, this is reporting parent information on studentaid.gov. And remember, there's also a fact sheet called Who's My Parent when I fill out the FAFSA. There's even, I think there's it's either a video or an infographic. I can't believe I don't remember right now. It might be an infographic that goes through Who's My Parent when I fill out the FAFSA. Thank you, it's an infographic. And so that's for people who are more visual and they don't want to read. God forbid they should have to read several bullets, right? So this goes through who's my parent according to the FAFSA, what if my parents are divorced or separated. There's a difference between divorced or separated parents who don't live together and divorced or separated parents who do live together. And you can find all these nuances in here. What if I have a step-parent? What if my step-parent is widowed? What if my parents are in a same-sex marriage? What if I live with someone other than my parents? All that stuff is covered on this page. So to talk about the specific question, so the separated parents that question was about, do they live together or not? Do we know? Where's my friend who I said wave at me? They don't live together. Okay. So if they're separated parents who do not live together, then what the student is going to do is act kind of as if they're like divorced, basically, because they, both parents aren't in the same household contributing to the financial strength of that household. So the student is going to answer the questions about the parent with whom they lived more during the past 12 months. And that means like more means down to, it could be down to the minute. You know, like if the parents have 50-50 custody or whatever, they need to figure out which one did you truly live with more. And it doesn't matter who claims you on their taxes, and it doesn't matter, you know, if one of the parents like has a nicer car or whatever. It's who you lived with more. Okay, is that good? Okay, awesome. All right, let's move on to some questions at the mic.
I apologize if you already said this, but will the PowerPoint be available on the NACAC site after this?
I believe it already is.
Already is. All right, thank you.
Yeah, is anybody from NACAC here? I know that NACAC posts all the PowerPoints, and I gave this one to them by the deadline, like the good little soldier I am. So they do have it, and it will be up. I haven't made any changes since I gave it to NACAC, so no worries. You'll be able to get it. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple little things. First, on the front end, on the right now, I thank you for addressing the FAFSA on the web worksheets. I love those, and I've always gotten frustrated that they don't come out until the end of January, which has always been a bit frustrating, and now they're going to be available for download. Will they be available for a bulk order?
Will the worksheets be available for bulk order? I believe the answer to that is yes, they still will. And if you go to the FAFSA updates page on the toolkit, and I can show it to you, because we're on the internet. Okay, so if you go to learn about financial aid, drop down to the FAFSA and go across to FAFSA updates. There's a section for availability of FAFSA materials and websites, and if you go to 1718, FAFSA materials and websites, FAFSA on the web worksheet, paper copy in English and Spanish is due October 20th in the warehouse, because obviously they have to finalize it first and then they have to send it to the printer.
Based on what the legislature approves.
Yeah, printing usually takes about a month, so this is the equivalent of late January.
Exactly, okay,
Yep.
all right, thanks. And then the other two things on the back end, thinking about the spring, first of all, just thought of the other thing while you were showing that last part of the website, with regard to reporting colleges and having the colleges get their reports. I understand it's wise to include a college in your home state just in case for state aid, but if the student isn't applying to any colleges in their home state, will it just stay parked in our state systems just in case the child does end up going to the community college in our community?
I think probably. I can't speak definitively about that, but I will point out that this page listing colleges on the FAFSA goes state by state to indicate what the recommendations are from each state.
Okay, we'll check that out.
So just as, what state are you from?
Maryland.
Yay. All right.
And then the other question is we've been talking a lot about what year is considered, what year do we do the tax retrieval form, and so on. But when the time comes for the verification, it'll be March and April when the colleges have to do their random or not random verification. Are they still verifying prior year, or are they now verifying prior year?
They're verifying what the student listed on the FAFSA. That's the whole idea behind verification, is that what the student put on the FAFSA was correct. They didn't make any oopsies so yeah, it will be prior, in other words, 2015.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, no problem. So just as an example on this page that talks about listing schools on the FAFSA, what Maryland requests is that students who live in that state list an eligible in-state college in order to be considered for state grant aid. And the order in which you list your colleges will not impact your eligibility for state aid programs. So you can find every state on here and their guidance, and you can just go from there. Advise your students accordingly. We're going to bounce over to this microphone next.
Thank you again for coming in and speaking on this topic. I'm a school counselor in the Cincinnati Public Schools in disadvantaged community where parental involvement is iffy at times. For our students whose parents don't have an extension on their to file their taxes for 2015, what are some strategies or what type of directions should we give those students who aren't going to get that financial support but are still in the custodial care of those parents who aren't involved or cooperated?
So you're talking about parents who just don't file taxes, even though they're supposed to?
Correct.
Yeah. I would talk to the financial aid office at the school about that, because I think if somebody can't provide the information the FAFSA asks for, they can't qualify for the financial aid. Morley, do you have anything that you want to add? We're being recorded. Thank you. This is not something I come up against much.
Yeah. If the parents, particularly, it comes up most often, probably refuse to provide information, you can click a box on the FAFSA that indicates that I'm not going to submit parent information, and finish the FAFSA with student information only. However, probably 100% of the time you're going to get follow-up from the college to explain that situation. The only aid, if there is no explanation or no decision to change your status to independent, the only thing the student is eligible for is unsubsidized direct loan.
Thanks, Morley. I actually didn't hear the question well enough to realize that's what it was. We do have that information covered on studentaid.gov to explain that if your parents refuse to provide information on the FAFSA and what you're supposed to do. We also explain on there why that's a really bad idea. do it that way, because you don't just want an unsub loan. You know, you want to maximize your eligibility for aid. There are programs such as, like, you know, I always use the Gates Millennium Scholarship as an example because they always had a really early deadline, and you had to be Pell eligible in order to qualify for Gates. And, you know, if you don't have that parent information on your FAFSA, you can never find out if you're going to be Pell eligible because you're not going to get an EFC. So you've just ruled yourself out for Gates and for all kinds of other things that require FAFSA information in order to be eligible for them. So yeah, we really encourage people to get that parent information on their FAFSA. You guys can feel free when you speak to the mic, you can move it up or down or whatever so it's closer to your mouth. We are recording, and we want to make sure that people can hear the recording. And also, I'm getting old, and this ear is really bad these days, which is why I keep turning like this every time I'm listening to you. So if you project, like my NCAN colleague here, I would greatly appreciate it, and so would people who are going to be listening to the recording. We're over here now.
You talked about when there is a change or a loss of income, so parent had a job, 2015, lost the job, and I'm sure in those situations, kids are running to tell the universities. What about the opposite? And, you know, they fill it out, and it's like, oh, well, you know, we'll go by 2015, but then parent became fully employed in 2016, and they're thinking, well, I don't have to share this, and they might not be running to tell the school that we have more income. And at what point would that come out? And I don't know.
Well, it'll definitely come out when they fill out the next year's
Right.
FAFSA, because it'll be on the 2016 taxes.
But so potentially they could be getting financial aid for a given school year based on information that they're from 2015.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean, everybody's going to be really, unless they, you know, unless they have that situation where somebody lost a job, et cetera. So it's kind of, it's actually, if you think of it, it's kind of a level playing field.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this mic.
Hi. So I, like, as a college counselor, I have a lot of trouble with the verification process. Are there any talks or discussions about like streamlining and standardizing the verification process for all schools so that it's easier for us to like assist our students?
Yeah, I mean, there are always people talking about that. We actually provide schools with a sort of standard form that they can use, but they don't have to. And in the end, I think the idea is that we tell schools how to administer financial aid, but we don't tell them every single little detail about how to do it. I will take that comment back to, you know, to pass on to my colleagues who deal with the schools, just to sort of emphasize that this can be kind of a pain for people who are helping students through the front end of that process. Best thing I can recommend in the meantime is just make sure the student looks at everything and keeps in touch with the school. And honestly, if a financial aid office gets tons of questions from students who are confused about their verification process, maybe they'll fix it.
Thank you.
Sure. We have like 2 minutes left, so we're going to take a question over here, and then maybe we'll have time for another one over here. And then I need to get back. I have a meeting I need to go to, but I am going to be at my booth from probably about 1 to 4 today. And tomorrow from, I think the booths are open from 10 to 2 or something like that. So please come by booth 316 if you have additional questions. Go ahead.
This should be quick. Are students only allowed to put 10 schools on their FAFSA?
Students still can there's only room for 10 schools on the FAFSA at a time, and then later on, if they change their mind, oh, I'm not going to apply to this school after a while, they can switch it out and put another one in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi. So for the sake of transparency, is there anything in the world of FAFSA resources that is parent-facing and would allow us college counselors to better assist parents in understanding their EFC?
Oh, in understanding the EFC. Parent-facing, regarding the EFC, I was going to say we have this parent video that talks about getting their FSA ID. Not specifically. We have information about the EFC very, very high level on
Right.
studentaid.gov explaining what it is in general. We also have the EFC formula booklet on studentaid.gov. That's not parent-facing or student-facing or anybody-facing, it's just the formula. If people want to understand it better, they can actually plug their own numbers in, speaking of doing math. But thank you. We have a couple of new writer-editors joining our team soon. Maybe that can be a project for somebody.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys. We need to stop now. Thanks.